We have in-person and virtual training today for the multi-agency funding training for water and wastewater. We have not had one of these since 2020, and that one was all virtual. So we haven't had in-person, I think, since 2017. So it's very nice to be able to have both options and see people here and online. Today, we are going to cover overviews of the different funding agencies, grants and loan eligibility, applying funding cycles, and then the slides will be made available on the DEQ website, deq.idaho.gov/SRF, under resources and state revolving fund presentation materials. We had hoped to have them up there before today's presentation. Hopefully they'll be up before tomorrow's, and if not, we'll send those out to you guys when we have the recording finished, so you'll have access to those. All participants are currently muted, and please add questions to the chat box as you have them, and they will be addressed at the end. For those of you in person, you can write them down, and then when we get to the end of each presentation, we can go over those. All right, so our agenda today with a breakdown of times, meeting introductions, and then overview of each agency's program. There will be a break from 10:15 to 10:30, and then we'll cover grant loan eligibility, applying funding cycles, and then approval now what. And we should be done by noon. I think they'll be fine. Today's speakers, so we have Noel with USDA-Rural Development, Dennis Porter with Commerce, the Community Development Block Grant, Karen Kelly, Army Corps of Engineers, Mariana Peavy with Idaho DEQ, Sean with Idaho Bond Bank, and Justin with Idaho Department of Water Resources. Then our first speaker, Noel, is going to kick off. There you go.
I think that's live. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks, LaDon, for the intros. And we'll just jump right in here. So, little overview on USDA Rural Development. We have a lot of different programs, pretty much anything that a rural community could need. We have a funding program for. We have a housing program, single family housing, multifamily housing, rural business program for job creation and to help for-profit businesses. Our community facilities program, which is fire stations and hospitals and those type of facilities. We have a national program that's electric and broadband, and those have been in the news here quite a bit lately, our telecom programs, and then the water environmental programs, which is what I'm mainly going to focus on today. But I want to mention a little bit about our community programs because both of those programs are programs that I oversee. So a little bit more about USDA Rural Development. We have $233 billion portfolio. So we've worked with a lot of rural communities throughout the nation. I looked the other day and we have over 1 million current borrowers nationwide. So a little bit about community programs, community facilities. What can it do? As I mentioned, it can do city halls, police stations, community centers. We have a little bit of money in grants, but it's mostly a loan program. And, this program is really kind of underutilized in our state. So I guess that's the other reason I'm mentioning it today. So if anybody in the crowd has ideas on how to utilize this program, we'd like to hear from you. Water environmental programs. This is the one that I'm going to focus on, and We're going to go into depth later on these, but I just kind of want to give you a breakdown of the different sub-programs within WEP. The main program is our water and waste direct loans and grants. That's what the majority of you probably used in the past, and that's what most communities are looking for. It's a subsidized loan program, and there is a fair amount of granted available through that program. The next one's our emergency community water assistance grant, ECWAG. I think Idaho's done a great job of accessing this program. It's money held at the national office, and we've probably utilized this almost as much as any other state in the nation. Then the next two, SEARCH and PPG, those are planning grant programs, so helping your project get off the ground with a little bit of money to do their facility plans and create your environmental reports. We have a Native American set-aside grant program, and then we do have a water and waste guaranteed loan program that can be a good fit for higher income areas or projects that don't want to deal with some of the federal red tape. And like I said, I'll go into further depth on those in the next section. I just wanted to kind of introduce them. Funding wise, the state doesn't get a ton of money. We get about 12 to 13 million in loan, 3 to 3.5 in grant each year. But the one thing about Idaho is we spend our money and then we go after more at the national office, and there's national office reserve funds and there's other set aside funds and pots of money that are available at the national level that we can access. So bring your projects in and we'll do our best to find the funding for it. But just realize with the size of projects nowadays, literally one project could wipe out our state allocation. Rates, term security, rates are adjusted quarterly. We have a market, intermediate, and a poverty rate. Everybody's can get the market rate. To get the intermediate rate, you have to be below the state non-metro MHI. And then to get the poverty rate, you have to be below 80% of that state non-metro and also alleviating a health and sanitary concern. Those are adjusted quarterly. It looks like we may stay the same, maybe even go down, but we should know in another week or two where our rates are going to be going January 1st. Terms, typical term is 40 years for a water and sewer project, unless it's a GO bond or an LID, which is it's a 30 years for state law. So we do have fairly long terms that can help keep user rates down. Security for public bodies, cities, counties, districts. It's typically a revenue bond. So these communities, if they are a public body, need to either pass a bond by election or seek and get judicial confirmation to move forward on their project. For nonprofits, it's a little bit different. We usually take a mortgage or a deed of trust on any property that they own, and then UCC filing and promissory note. MHI figures, we're going to go into this again later, but main point here is that we've transitioned to updated MHI figures. We were using pretty old data up until the beginning of this fiscal year. We're using 2006 to 10 MHI data and 2010 census. We've transitioned to the 2020 census for population and the 2017 to 2021 ACS MHI data. So what's that mean? Well, some communities that weren't grant eligible are now grant eligible. Some communities that were are no longer. So it's kind of shuffled the deck a little bit. So there were some winners and there were some losers. If you have questions about your community, just reach out to us and we'll help answer those questions. I'll go into more depth on that later. Kind of end out the overview. Just want to give you kind of a structure of our organization statewide. We have a state director that's a political appointee. That position's vacant right now, so Dale Lish is the acting state director. The community programs director is me, Noel LaRoque. We have a business programs director, Tim Wheeler, and our housing director, Sean Cafferty. So I mentioned some of those other programs. If you do have questions about them, I'd be happy to try to answer them, but you'd be better off giving one of those gentlemen a call on those other programs. And then finally, wanted to mention our structure statewide. Currently, we have 4 area offices, as you can see on the map there. We have specialists out in each area office, so they're closer to your communities than us here in the Boise area, and they are a resource for you. Call them, ask them questions. They're available to help with applications. They're going to be along with you through the whole ride from the beginning to the end. So I would encourage you to get to know them. Up north, we have Tracy Dalen and Amanda Zweifel. In the north office, we have Noe Ramirez and April Tyson in our Caldwell office. Tony Ballestero in our central Twin Falls office. Currently don't have a specialist in our Blackfoot office. So Taylor Pratt, the area director, is our main contact for now. But this gives me a great opportunity to plug that we're hiring in the Blackfoot office, and that announcement should come out here in the next week or so. So if there's anybody that's interested, I encourage you to look at USA Jobs and apply for that position. Long term, we hope to fill 2 in that office, and then we're going to transition to 3 offices instead of 4. So the Blackfoot and the Caldwell office are going to split up the Twin Falls office and cover that. And then we'll have two specialists in each office. So that's kind of the general overview. And I'll hand it off to the next presenter.
Thank you, Noel. I'm Dennis Porter with the Idaho Department of Commerce, and I manage the Community Development Block Grant Fund. So what are Community Development Block Grant? You'll hear me refer to it as CDBG. It's federally funds that come from HUD. So HUD, as we all know, is Housing and Urban Development. And note, Housing and Urban Development. So we're utilizing these CDBG funds, and we cannot use these funds to build new construction of housing. Now, we can use the funds to support the new construction of housing. And these funds, these state CDBG funds, are not used in urban areas. We're out in rural areas. So sometimes when we're trying to implement these funds out in rural areas and not do housing, you run into some issues with or things that seem a little odd, especially when you do environmental reviews. It's like, well, why you guys, we're doing a water system here, and you guys are worrying about noise and explosive hazards. Remember, that's HUD's focus, housing and urban, and those issues come about when you're dealing with housing, but you do have to address them when you're doing a water system or sewer system. So always recognize where the funds come from. Nationwide, about 3.1 billion, Ryan, is what the program gets. So the entitlements are the bigger cities. They get the CDBG funds. They get 70% of that we'll call 3.3 billion. The state programs, we get 30%. What does that mean to Idaho? It trickles down. We get about 7.5 million to utilize in the state. Now, who can apply for these funds? Who are the eligible applicants? Cities and counties are the only eligible applicants. So you have to be a city or county in order to apply for these funds. Now, the funds can be granted to, if you're working with a water district, sewer district, or nonprofit organization, maybe it's a senior association, can be sub-granted. So a city, let's say we're working with a county, Idaho County, and they want to sub-grant the funds down to a district like the Elk City Water District, they can do that. And that's just, sub-granting the funds down. City or county does not just become a pass-through. A lot of them don't want to take ownership of it. We'll just pass it through. That's not reality. They are taking ownership. Number one, they're signing off on the environmental review. That's a big component and unique component of our program is the city or county are signing off on the environmental review. Most of them don't recognize what they're signing off on, but that's what they're doing. And they also have the financial management responsibilities, and there are also civil rights requirements that they have to meet as well. So, and sometimes we'll just become a pass-through. That's not reality. Entitlement cities do not qualify for these state funds because they get CDBG directly from HUD. And these entitlement cities, as you can see on the list, Coeur d'Alene, Lewiston, Caldwell, Nampa, Meridian, Boise, Twin, Pocatello, and Idaho Falls. So our state CDBG does not go into these communities. We're going out to the other, other 200 cities out there and counties with the 7.5 million. Set asides. So we're a grant. We have set asides and maximum dollars available. The first one, and the one we'll talk about mainly today, because we mainly focus on water and sewer, is our public facilities or infrastructure set aside. We use the term public facilities in this program. It's pretty broad. It does include water and sewer. So just recognize that. When I mentioned public facilities, it is water and sewer. So that's one of our set asides. We just had the deadline was just 2 weeks ago, Friday before Thanksgiving. And the maximum request is $500,000. Now we do have set aside for senior centers as well as community centers and public parks. The maximum request there is $245,000. Seems like an odd number. Why $245,000? Well, last year we were like, oh, we're gonna have to do this Build America, Buy America thing. But if we keep everything under $250,000, we're good. Like federal money amount under $250,000, you're good. Now there's a new interpretation. It's the total project has to be under $250,000. So you'll probably see us bump that number back up because we were trying to kind of not be the trailblazers under Build America, Buy America. We wanted others to go before us so we could understand it. But so right now it is $245,000 if you're looking to do a senior center, community center, or public park. We do have a set aside for imminent threat. Hopefully you never have to use it. We're more of a post-disaster after the fact. We're not going to save you from the issue right then and there, but after the fact, when you go in for the permanent fix, that's a good fit for this program. We also have what we call an economic development set aside. We break that out into two subsets. We have downtown revitalization. So we can help downtowns go in and make improvements in that 2 to 3 block area. Usually we're doing ADA improvements on sidewalks, curb cuts, that type of thing. But we also, can help you deal with surface water drainage. Everybody's going to use that issues with, or even lighting. So those are the elements we're usually doing in a downtown revitalization project, trying to make that downtown more attractive and people wanting to go there. The other set aside we have is what we call job creation. But what we're doing there is we're providing the public infrastructure to help support the creation of jobs. So we're usually doing a water system or sewer system extension out to hopefully a new plant or manufacturing, business that's expanded and they need better fire flow. One we did recently in Fruitland was Fire Lane Road for Swire Coke. They needed a fire lane. They're expanding. That project worked really well for us. So we do have that job creation set aside. Our funding partners, all of them are pretty much a question.
Back to the 500,000 for water and sewer. Is that per project? So 500,000 for a water project, 500,000 for a sewer project, or 500,000 for the city?
500,000 for a water project, and then it could be 500,000 for sewer. Funding partners are all in the room today. Of course, cities that we work with are partially a subrecipient if we're working with a water association or sewer district. They usually have money on the table. We have DEQ, one of our big funding partners, Rural Development, one of our big funding partners, the Army Corps of Engineers, one of our big funding partners. And then it can be too, urban renewal districts, especially more so usually when we've done a few water projects that have urban renewal, but a lot of times we'll see that in our downtown projects as well. And then recognizing that's why partly why we're all here is we all have different requirements. We have similar, but there are different requirements and processes. So yes, we all want to get on the same page with environmental reviews. I don't know if that'll ever happen, but you know, what some agencies call a draft FONSI, we call a FONSI. Some agencies do 15-day comment period, we require 30-day comment period. So that's why, in part, why we're here today, to kind of work through some of it. The rules that come with CDBG. First, you have to meet a national objective. We'll go into more details on this, but a national objective is a community. Our funding has to benefit a community that is at least 51% low to moderate income. I'll go into more detail on what that means. We do in our downtowns, we do get away from the low to moderate income benefit and look at an area that's considered, they use a pretty negative term, but it's slum and blight is the term we use. And then post-disaster, if you have a post-disaster, what we're looking at is you have this imminent threat that's developed. Usually a natural catastrophe has caused it, flooding, landslide, fire, earthquake, that's damaged your public infrastructure. And then that's usually qualify for CDBG funding. Our procurement requirements that the grantee has to go through, environmental reviews that the grantee has to go through. You do have to comply with the Uniform Act under property acquisition. New for us as we're starting to get more and more into this is Build America, Buy America provisions will be required for our program. Labor standards, we do, if we're in construction, we do get leave vacant wage rates. So that's one of the things this program brings to the table. We have financial management responsibility, citizen participation, furthering fair housing. The grantee's got to make certain steps to help further fair housing. Once again, the funds are coming from HUD. And that's one of the requirements of HUD is to help ensure compliance of the Fair Housing Act. We have 504 and ADA accessibility requirements, and then equal access requirements for the program or potential individuals who want to be involved with the program and the benefits of the program. And because we bring all these requirements and we're working with small cities. So if you show up in Du Bois and you say, here are all the requirements, implement it. It's overwhelming to a city clerk who's already running the city. So we do require, or let me say, we do recommend grant administrators work with these cities to help them work through all these requirements and regulations. Contacts for the program, you have me. There's my contact number. And then we have Tony sitting up front here. Good wave. And then Danny is also, she's working in Eastern Idaho. And then we have our website. So we do try to keep our information up to date. We have our application handbook on our website. We do have a grant administration manual on our website. And then we do have other resources on our website. So we also encourage you to check out our website. We do try to manage that and make sure all that information is up to date. So the next program went on?
Yep.
Okay.
Next we have Annalie Coulter.
I'm here too. This is Karen.
Okay, Karen, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Karen Kelly, and I'm the project manager here at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in Walla Walla, and for the Section 595 program. Annalie, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, can you all hear me?
I can.
Hopefully everyone there in the room can hear me. My name is Annalie Coulter, and I'm an environmental resource specialist with the Walla Walla District U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So I work side by side with Karen under the 595 program and complete the environmental review requirements. Thank you.
The Section 595 program is a cost share program, which means that the government pays 75% of whatever the total award is, and the non-federal sponsor pays 25% of the award. And we do wastewater, wastewater, and we are also allowed to do environmental restoration. However, we never get to that because we need so much wastewater and water work done everywhere. Next slide, please. I think I have 2 here. So this is basically what I was talking about. The Section 595 program all stems from the Water Resources Development Act of 1999, and it originally did not include Idaho, but now does as of 2003 when it was amended. And it didn't amend it just for rural Idaho, it is for all of Idaho, although we do most of our work with the more rural communities. As all the other speakers have mentioned, we work very closely with each of the other Idaho funding agencies. We try to leverage the funds that we have for the best advantage for every city. Our funds come only after a presidential budget is signed. So as long as we're in a continuing resolution, we have no funds for this program. But when we do have a president's budget, this program is funded at varying levels. We've been funded for quite a bit. We've been funded last year. We got only $500,000. So it just depends. But we have the same kind of requirements that everybody else does, in that we have to do environmental reviews, we have to do real estate reviews, and we have to do engineering reviews and cultural reviews. So all of those things have to happen in order for the non-federal sponsor to actually use our funding. And that is all for us.
Thanks, Karen. Hi, my name is Mariana Hung Peavy. I am the Grant and Loan Bureau Chief for Idaho Department of Environmental Quality, and I'm going to speak to a few of the programs that we have. I kind of broke this up into 2 parts. We do have a loan program that's pretty much the biggest program that we really push out for funding infrastructure projects, drinking water and wastewater. And we also have a few grant programs that I'll go over as well. Now, under the loans, we have the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund program and the Clean Water State Revolving Fund program. And over the next, 4 more years, we also have the bipartisan infrastructure law funding that we have. We do have a few loan program with the bill funds, but we do have a few grant programs under our bill that I'll be going over as well. For the State Revolving Fund program, I will refer to it as our base SRF program, just to make a difference between the bipartisan infrastructure law funding and our regular funding. So the base program, we did get the authority to run this grant and loan program, and so that's under the Idaho Code Title 39. And then we have 2 Idaho statutes that help us oversee the administration of the loans and the grant program. So I'm going to speak to our base programs first, the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund program and the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. And the Clean Water is for our wastewater projects, and I'll go more in those. But to kind of let you know how this program works is we have DEQ, and then we get those 2 base grants from EPA with state match. We have 20% state match for those base grants. We then lend that funds out to drinking water, wastewater systems, and the money that we lend out, we get back in repayment dollars. And those repayment dollars that we have, we then lend that money out. So that is kind of the revolving nature of our program. Right now, just with our base program, with the loans that we have, our portfolio is about $500 million that's held within DEQ. Now, with those grants that we have, that you'll see kind of on the right side here, we have money that we do pull from those grants, which we call set-asides. And I don't speak too much about those, but I do want to show how it affects the program here. The set-asides, we pull off funds, a variety of programs within DEQ. So not only does it pay my staff's salary to manage this program, there's some other programs that it pays for. We call technical assistance within DEQ. The set-asides help pay for that. So definitely DEQ staff to go out to drinking water systems and assist them. It helps pay for what we call CIDWIS. It's a drinking water database to help drinking water system track their compliance. We also have a source water protection grant that is paid out of those set-asides. And also with the set-asides money, we help pay for our planning grant program. We do take some money from interest to try to help support the planning grant program, but you can see the set-asides with the base grants really cover a lot of programs within DEQ to support drinking water and wastewater systems. Now, with the loans, our interest rates fairly low. They do range between 1.5% to right now 2.75%. Usually, if you get the lower end at your community or your system needs to be considered what we call disadvantaged. Our loans range from 20 years to 30 years. Now, to be considered disadvantaged in order to receive the reduced interest rates and the increased loan terms, we do look at your user rates. So with the project, if your user rates will be above 2% of the median household income, you are under that disadvantage umbrella and can qualify for these items. Now, if you're not quite over 2% of median household income, we do look at a range between 1.5% and 2%. And if you show that you have a declining population in your community and your unemployment rate is below the state average, that can also help you qualify for a disadvantaged community. Yes.
So, that's a tricky question, but when you say user rates have to be above 2% of MHI, that means more than 2% of the population has to be at that MHI level.
No. So for example, let's say your user rates on average is $100 a month. So what we look at is we take the MHI for your community and look at 2% and divide that by 12. And if that is, say, at $80, then your user rate is above the 2%. So that's how we look at it. Now, so these are some qualifying things on disadvantaged community, but I will say for the bipartisan infrastructure law, when it comes to the lead service line replacement, we do look at how you qualify as being disadvantaged community a little bit different. We utilize a program called the Environmental Justice Screening Tool to help us determine if your community is considered disadvantaged. So there is a little bit difference there. We do have it outlined in some of our documentation. So we can help you through. Some other things I just want to mention with the principal forgiveness that we have. So from our grants that we get, we do have to give out a portion of it in principal forgiveness. That money in principal forgiveness, a majority of it goes to disadvantaged communities, but there is some of it that we do put towards lead service line replacement, not just lead service line replacement, but to address lead issues. And then we have a little bit to address emergency projects as well. And with the emergency projects, is your community has to have a declaration of either by the city or the state that there's an emergency declared. And then the funds that go to it is pretty much just it's a stopgap, pretty much just to solve that emergency situation. So the health issues can be addressed or people can get access to water. Now, in order to get our loans, the drinking water, wastewater systems really do have to have these three main things. They do need to have a completed facility plan. They need to have an environmental review done. And also they have to have the authority to increase debt. We know it costs some money to do these items, so we have established a planning grant program to address that. With this planning grant program, we pay for 50% or help cover 50% of the cost to do the facility plan and the environmental review. Now, most years what we have is about $350 to address wastewater planning grants for wastewater systems, and then $350 for drinking water systems. We do, in order to try to get out as much money to as many communities possible, we do have a max on our grant amount. So on the wastewater side, it's $65,000, and on the drinking water side, it's $45,000. I do want to say the last few years, so I know there's can be some confusion because we did get some additional money. We did receive ARPA funding and leading Idaho funding from the state, where we did not have those maxes, and then we gave out pretty much covered all the planning grants. Next year, next funding year, that will not be the case. We are not getting any additional funding. We will be going back to our typical funding years of $320,000 a year. Another grant that we have is the Sewer Overflow and Stormwater Grant. This is a new grant we just put out this year, and what we're putting it towards is I&I testing and for stormwater planning documents. There is a 20% matching local share that is required with this grant. And we do get about $200,000 a year for this. So not a lot of money. We will work these grants as similar as we can to the planning grants to get the funding out. But this is a direct grant that we get from EPA. So there's a lot more paperwork involved. So we do have to submit to them how we plan to spend the money. So we do get letters of interest from you. We prioritize it, and then we send it to EPA for their approval. Once they get their approval, we can come back and fund these grants. It does take just a little bit longer since we do have to go through more of an approval process with EPA to fund these projects. We do anticipate getting $200,000 next year. This grant will be funded as Congress supports it. Right now, it is a popular grant. We do expect that we continue to get around $200,000 a year for the next several years. Now, with the bipartisan infrastructure law funding, we did get some grant money. I'm going to call it grant, but really it is some loan money with 100% principal forgiveness. And principal forgiveness works like a grant. So these emerging contaminants, we have two parts. We have one for wastewater systems and one for drinking water systems. And they're to address PFAS and unregulated contaminants. So we're really flexible on how we're addressing it, especially on the wastewater side. If there's anything that your project may be doing that may help remove some of these emerging contaminants from water sources, it could qualify. And with drinking water systems, again, if your drinking water systems, how you want to handle it to remove emerging contaminants from your drinking water, this funding can support it. And we will receive this funding through 2028. We also have another grant program, which is called Lead Testing in Schools. That money, it's for both daycares and schools. If they want to test their water to see if there's any possible lead contamination, we pay for that testing. They just need to reach out to us and we can send them free lead testing kits to see if there's lead in the water. And if they're positive results, we can also tap into that grant to try to help fund remediation. So they're giving us some flexibility to that. Right now, we're actually working with the school in eastern Idaho to replace their lead plumbing in their schools with that water. So I think it's a really nice grant that we'll have for the next couple of years. Yes.
So that's something that the school district would have to contact DEQ?
Mm-hmm. Correct. So for this school, yeah, they are actually a water system as well. So it works pretty easily when they can contact us. But they just contact us and we will work to try to get some of this funding to help address that. Again, with this one, we do have to work closely with EPA on getting their approval and the project approved, but we do have guidance out that we can submit to you from EPA that shows what qualifies under that agreement for addressing those issues. And again, I'll mention we have a little bit of money with the State Revolving Fund program to help kind of support that as well. Another loan that we have under the bipartisan infrastructure law grant is the lead service line replacement. This is a loan program to give out to drinking water systems to replace lead service line. We do have a lower rate on this right now. It's about 1% interest rate to 1.25%. So really low cost for communities to address their lead issues. It does support facility plans, and for lead service line replacement, also inventory is also under the scope of this program, and also to replace those lead service lines. Some communities may qualify for 100% forgiveness, but for this grant, it is a loan program. We do have to give out half of it in principal forgiveness. So a community that's considered disadvantaged can get this project done fairly cheaply. And this funding will be through 2028. We are getting $28 million a year for this program. Kind of speaking to how much money that we are getting, and for this year, I'll kind of actually speak to next year since we're in the process of starting our letters of interest to get interest for the next state year. But for our base state revolving fund program, I am anticipating that we're not going to get very much. Our funding for that is being diverted to earmarks and or congressionally spending grants. And so we believe we'll probably get less than $500,000 for those base grants. So we will not be getting a a lot of funding there to put out for loans. But we still have our repayment dollars that we're getting from our traditional portfolio, and we are still getting some funding for the bipartisan infrastructure loan. So for the next year, I believe we'll have around $25 million for drinking water state revolving fund projects. That's with our repayment dollars and with the bill funding. And under the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, I'm anticipating $10 million. Now, yeah.
Does that compare to when you guys have received funds from the federal government on how much you guys are able to lend out each year?
Yes, our usual base grants that we get under drinking water SRF, a typical year is usually around $11 million. And so, of course, with bipartisan infrastructure law, that would be around $20 million plus repayments. This next year, some of our repayments are going to some already predetermined grants or loans that we already have, but usually with the repayment dollars and the grants, we usually have around $35 million. So next year, yeah, it's going to be a lot lower than typical years. On the drinking water side, I already mentioned that we had $11 million, of course, with bipartisan infrastructure law. We get around $20 million for that. So really, we could be looking at $40-50 million with our traditional funding. But again, that will be off as than what we anticipated. With leading Idaho funding and ARPA funding, you know that we had received those in previous years. We will not be putting any towards new projects from the funding we already have. We have spent it. We did a really good job the last couple of years on spending that money, and there's no talks that I've heard or anticipating any funding for this next year from the state. And I already kind of went over some of those other EPA grants that we're having. Okay. Now, I'll just wanted to show kind of what we've seen for demand for our program. And I think this is a really nice kind of snapshot of what we're seeing in the state. We do partner with Rural Development, all the other funding agencies here. So a lot of these projects that we see here, definitely these other federal agencies and state agencies see as well. And then we kind of partner together to try to address this demand. So the last 2 fiscal years, we saw over $1 billion of requests for projects. So we saw 1.4 and $1.3 billion in requests. Next year, not sure what the request will be. We haven't seen quite a decline in funding. Yes.
I think caused the shift.
Oh. Well, what's interesting is that because we do have the planning grant program, we kind of see projects kind of coming down the pipe. And so we kind of knew it was coming. We were trying to, because even in the previous years, in 2022, that was $500 million. And we're kind of going, well, we're seeing this. And we know we have a pipeline of projects coming down that will increase this demand. We also knew there was systems that hadn't received planning grants that were in the effort. So we kind of knew it was coming. And a couple of things that we've seen really affect this is most of the drinking water and wastewater systems out there are over 30 years. We have aging infrastructure. We also seen compliance issues go up over the last several years. So systems were trying to prep and get their systems under new compliance. Some other things that we have seen is population growth. So some of those systems that were just kind of plugging along, maybe Band-Aid together a little bit, then with the population growth, it got to a point where we can put Band-Aids on this anymore. We really do have to address it. So, and I will also say in the last several years, even though we're addressing this out in loans, we do currently have over 200 planning grants that we're overseeing right now. So those are future projects. And also with some of the money that we've put out with ARPA and Leading Idaho funding, in many cases, we only funded the first phase of those projects. So we do know there's some of those projects will have second phases. Now, they might not address it in the next 5 years, but definitely within 10 years, we're seeing that. We have done surveys as well through Boise State University, and then LaDon also worked on projects with some other staff to do a survey. And so we're seeing cost, definitely in the clean water side over the next 10 years, still about $10 billion of need just on the wastewater side. Now, these I've combined drinking water and wastewater. So again, there's over $1 billion of need just on the clean water side. So we will see this for a while. One thing that I'll state is I know that I've kind of talked about the funding being down for our program. We are trying to message out to please still submit letters of interest to DEQ. This is kind of our one way to be able to communicate both to our federal representatives and to our state representatives about what's going on in the state of Idaho. We also work closely, again, with the other funding agencies here, and to show them the projects that we're seeing, and we try to figure out how we can come together to help meet your needs. So in some cases, rural development will go out nationally and try to bring additional funding into Idaho. We will, when we actually have the letters of interest, it's a lot easier for us to go to the state representatives or the governor's office and say, hey, by the way, this is what we're seeing in Idaho. We need assistance on figuring out how we can help support these projects, these needed projects. So we want to definitely fight some perception that maybe we only had this drive of funding because we had, ARPA and Leading Idaho funding. We are seeing these communities go, we have projects that need to happen. And so we want to be able to share that story so we can work on helping out both these, all of these systems. And this was just kind of showing our appropriation. Definitely is, altogether, it's definitely a lot less than what we're seeing as demand. So we definitely want to work with everyone here on that demand. Now, this is a list of our grant and loan program staff. Definitely myself. We have Charlie that oversees the drinking water SRF. Alicia sees the clean water. We do have 2 engineers on staff as well to help you through the projects. And LaDon oversees the environmental reviews, and Zoe oversees the planning grants, and Garrett does just about everything on the back end and also helps develop those letters of interest that we'll go over a little bit later. And I know we have a lot of staff here, so we do have an email where if you guys have any questions at all, just utilize this email and we'll get it to the right person to answer your questions. And I'll go ahead and stop to the next person.
Morning, everybody. My name is Sean Neidiger. I'm the Executive Director for the Idaho Bond Bank Authority. I'm here to talk to you today about our program. The Bond Bank Authority is a pooled borrowing program created by the Idaho legislature in 2001 that's governed by the Idaho Bond Bank Authority Board, with the goal of providing cost-effective long-term financing for Idaho municipalities. Staff for the program consists of myself, and we're all out of the treasurer's office. Myself, John Fulton, who's the treasurer for the Bond Bank Authority, and Marissa Landers, who's the secretary to the board. Our board of directors is made up of 5 members. Julie Ellsworth, the state treasurer, is the chairman of the board. We also have 2 government appointees, one being Lynn Crosby, who's a retired banker and financial consultant, and Seth Grigg, who's the executive director of the Idaho Association of Counties. We also have 1 member from the House of Representatives, which is Representative Josh Tanner, and a member from the Senate, which is Senator Ben Tate. To give you a little history of the Bond Bank Authority, since its inception in 2001, we actually didn't do our first issue until 2004. But since that time, we've issued over 37 series of bonds, providing $636 million of funding for Idaho municipalities. And you can see it kind of ebbs and flows throughout the years based on demand. The large spike there in 2012 was mostly due to refundings that were done through our program based on market dynamics and interest rates, and local municipalities able to take advantage of refunding their bonds to achieve savings. Our most recent bond issue that we did was the Series 2021 A and B bond issue, which we issued a 1.8 million of tax exempt bonds, as well as 34.09 million of taxable bonds to refinance outstanding loans, achieving $4.2 million in savings for the participants of that bond series. And when we combined that with the issue before that, which was the 2020 A and B, we achieved over 10.7% reduction in interest cost between the two, which equated to a $13.5 million savings between the 2 bond issues that we did. Here's just a list of the members or the participants that were inside the 2021 ASB. You can see some of the savings there that were achieved by refinancing the debt that they had outstanding. So, the largest one there, the city of Jerome Wastewater, saved $1.4 billion or 10% on net present value basis.
Just a little.
Yep. Is that better? Or worse? How about there? Is that better? Sorry. Oh, there you go. So benefits of the Idaho Bond Bank Authority are lower interest rate costs, and that's based on the credit enhancement that the Idaho Bond Bank Authority offers, where the state has a state sales tax revenue pledge. So in the event that a participant can't make their loan payment or their debt service payment, the state will step in and make that payment for them using sales tax revenue, and that basically acts as a backstop for the program and to the bondholders who buy the bonds that we issue. And given this backstop, we receive a very high rating from Moody's of a AA. Typically you have lower upfront issuance costs. So due to the economies of scale, when you have multiple borrowers that come through in a deal, they share those costs of issuance. The underwriter discount, the rating, bond counsel for the deal, those costs are all shared instead of doing it individually if they were to go out on their own. And along those same lines, we offer access to the market for issuers that may not otherwise be able to access the marketplace, being small rural areas that may not have a bond rating. They can come to our program combined with other issuers and take advantage of a bigger bond issue in the market, which is typically easier to sell as well. Or if it were a small bond issuance size, somebody came in with only $1 million in need, it's going to be probably larger costs for them, as opposed to if we combine that with, say, another $10 or $15 million insurer, then we can get those economies of scale through the program. And so graphically, kind of what does that mean? So here's just a scale of a single A revenue bond versus a double A revenue bond. So for example, the bond bank would be that blue line, and it's just for illustrative purposes. It wouldn't be this exact, but this is what rates were back on November 15th. We had the slides due. And so you can see that spread there. If you look at a 3-year or 5-year, 10-year, say the 10-year, you're saving 27.7 basis points by having a double A1 rating or a double A rating as opposed to a single A rating. So it's a lot of cost savings coming through the bond bank to get that higher credit rating. So what does that mean in terms of dollars? For that same graph that I just showed, you can see, 10 years, you're saving $27,700 per million issued in your bond issue per year. So the longer you go out in a normal interest rate environment, which we don't really have right now with an inverted yield curve, but typically you can see just the savings longer out you go based on that spread between the credit rating. And that's money that can go back into your communities and be used for other things. That's kind of a basic overview of the bond bank, and we'll go into more detail a little bit later. I'll hand it off to Justin.
Good morning. My name is Justin. I'm with the Department of Water Resources, Idaho Water Resource Board, and today we're kind of just going over our loans and grants programs. So we've got just the one loan program, and we do have tentatively three grant programs to be covered. Next slide. Starting with the loans. All of ours are tied to Idaho Code 42-1754 determines eligibility. So it's things like cities, municipalities, irrigation districts, things like that. But our scope is pretty broad. So we can do things like we've done wastewater treatment. We're helping resurface some dams, some canal pipe conversions. So a lot of our projects are geared more towards agriculture. But we also kind of get into, we've helped some cities out and stuff like that. The interest rate is tied to unfortunately, looking at all the other programs, our interest rate is tied to the federal prime. So 8.5 right now has been kind of a hard sell. But we're hoping come next quarter, we update quarterly. I'm hoping next quarter it's a little less bad, but terms, we go out to 30 years. Statutorily, we can do 60. I've seen some as low as 2 years. That's kind of the general spread. The difference here is the flexibility and securities. So we've got to meet Idaho Code 42-1756, subsection 5. But kind of the short version of a long story, we can take property, we can take, we try to steer away from things like individual houses and mortgages, but we can take things like water rights. So if you're an irrigation district or a canal company, you can put something up like infrastructure to kind of towards the security of your loan. Applications are taken year round. We fund them at every board meeting, and we do them every other month. So we just had one back in November. We'll have one in January, and then every month after that. We try to do 3 of them here in town, and then the rest roaming throughout the state. So the one in Maine, I think, will be out north near Hayden, then we'll be out near Bear Lake, and then we're back in town.
Can you move up just a little bit?
Oh yeah. How's that? Better? Worse? About the same? Cool. So these are the 3 grant programs, and really 2 of them are grant programs. One of them is a cost share, but it's still in the early phases. The flood management grants, each project is capped at $200,000, with the whole round being under $1 million. These are a 50% cost share for things like generally replacing culverts or washed out roads, things of that nature, something to help mitigate flood risk or repair flood damage. these come up every, funding closes in June. They're generally awarded in July. Sometimes there's some wiggle, but that's the time we try to stick to. Aging infrastructure grants. Right now, we're going into our 4th round. We're trying to do 2 a year. Each round is capped at $12.5 million, and these are a 1/3 cost share, with each cost share capped at $2 million. So these are things like replacing culverts, pipe conversions for canals. Again, it's generally more ag directed for things that water improvements, improving the delivery of the existing water. And then we've got our regional sustainability program. This is a new program. Our first selections are out the door. The round just closed here last Friday on the 1st. But these, it's a little more of a flexible program. It's a cost share more than a loan, but it's not a grant. And so we work with different entities to do things like the city of Nampa had a couple of projects where they're doing, they're digging a pit and doing a couple other things. And so we've funded all the 3 projects that they brought to us through this guy without any interest rates or anything like that. It's a lot more like a grant, but you've got to prove that you have the cost share in hand before we can get going. We've also got another one over in the Rafter River. So they got a loan. They've also got some grants, and then they did qualify through the sustainability program. And what they're doing is switching from groundwater to surface water from the Snake River. This program got them funding with the cash match through our loan program, and they're able to get the project going after they finish up setting up a groundwater district. So kind of a quick overview. Our loans generally can fit things that don't fit in other places. The hang up is 8.5%, a little steep. Generally, we can have funding in hand within 60 days. Lately, it's been 90. Everyone else, we're a little behind on hiring. 2 more starting next week. These aren't competitive though, so we take applications year round. You're not up against the other guy. Our grants are. So the aging infrastructure and the flood management grants, we accept applications. Aging infrastructure grants, there's one in the winter and one in the summer. Flood is in the spring. Those are competitive. They're scored. Lately, we've been able to fund the whole rest. So there's a good chance if you put in a project, you'll at least get, and we do partial funding in case we made the cut, but we're up against the round cap. So, and there's no reason, there's no limit on applying in each round. So we've had applicants apply 2 or 3 times in different, for the same project, different phases, to get 1/3 of that phase covered, up to 1/3 of the total project costs. The loan term is flexible, again, 5 to 30, but we've seen some, as we just did one as short as 2 years, because it's a bridge loan through, I want to say, a federal program where they just needed funds up front to pay for the work until the grant funds can be released. They pay back the loan, and now they've got federal grant funds.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, yeah.
All right, for those of you who have questions virtually, please add them to the chat or raise your hand. Garrett is going to unmute virtual participants. And thank you for all the comments in the chat to let us know when to speak up or move things around. Justin Walker did have a question about the DEQ lead testing grant for schools and childcare facilities, and whether it was only for schools and daycare facilities. And yes, that program is just for public schools and childcare facilities, and there is no match. And I put a link in the chat for more information on that program, or you can contact me, LaDon Kaler. I oversee that one. I don't see any other questions in the chat yet, but does anybody in the room have any questions?
On that school program, is the application due like all the other letter of interest on January? Or can you reach out anytime?
You can reach out anytime for that one. The lead testing is already set up with Idaho Bureau of Labs, and there's a link on that website to request testing. You can go through ours and then theirs, or if you don't want to do all that and you just want to contact me directly, I can send it to you and you can request as many tests as you need for your school or childcare facility. Thanks, Shelley. Anybody else? Yes.
It's kind of, can be anecdotal. Is there something that's specific that's driving the new sewer overflow and stormwater grant program? And something like permitting wise we're seeing, or is it something you can forecast in terms of it wasn't there then, it's here now, and why that might be?
With the, I'm going to use the abbreviation OSG as what we're calling it, but that was actually driven by Congress. So there was a study done by the Environmental Finance Advisory Board, which is a federal advisory board, and they saw there's definitely nationwide a need to address stormwater issues, and there wasn't a lot of direct funding to support stormwater funding. So they did create this grant program. I believe it was called the WRDA update with the Clean Water Act, and so this grant program was started and funded. DEQ didn't. We were able to get this grant for the last couple of years, but with all this additional funding, we haven't been able to actually take it. What we get appropriated, around $200,000, isn't a lot. This grant actually can, you'll see it nationally, but some of this appropriation is larger for some other states that have a lot more stormwater needs, and they can put it towards construction. For Idaho, we're only getting around $200,000 a year, and so we looked at the requirements, and we thought kind of the best way to focus this was to stormwater planning, because there's a few communities that are starting to see a need to address their stormwater. And but the biggest need we saw was definitely for I&I testing, which can impact stormwater issues.
I have a question on that follow-up.
Yes.
Oh, do you want to give it to someone else?
Go ahead.
Okay, go ahead, Shelley.
My apologies. So on that I&I, I hear so many communities struggling with I&I. Can you talk about what a eligible request might look like and about how much that is? Because it would be nice to be able to push that information out so that that money is getting utilized, because I just hear so many challenges with I&I.
I can speak to it, unless you want to speak.
Go ahead, and I'll tell you.
Okay, thanks. Right now with the stormwater grant, we can only give out up to $50,000. However, in general, for little I&I studies, we're seeing the cost more around $15,000. So we can cover that. Again, with that grant, there's a 20% local match requirement on that. So definitely up to $50,000. We may have to adjust that cost in future years, because we did get quite a bit of demand actually for that funding, and we only have $200,000 a year. So I don't know how we will alter that in the future, but priority-wise, we are prioritizing it like we are our wastewater planning grants and issuing it out. Some of it is tied nicely with our wastewater planning grants. So a community might have a wastewater planning grant, and then they tap into the OSG specifically for their I&I work for the overall planning effort. So that was kind of how we envisioned to really support that program.
Yeah, the only other thing I would add is it's the same process of a letter of interest with the same deadlines as the other one. And if you do it in conjunction with the wastewater grant, we do add those points together to try and make it so if we fund one, we fund both, and that to try and make sure we're serving the community as much as possible.
Now, there was a question here first, and then I'll go over here.
This is relatively simple. I assume that arsenic does not qualify for emerging contaminants.
No, I think arsenic is it's not a, what is that called? Arsenic is a regulated contaminant, so that would not qualify under the bipartisan infrastructure law. So that one's specific to PFAS and unregulated contaminants. Now, our regular drinking water SRF can go towards. And then also I do want to put out there that clean water SRF and also the planning grants can also address and go towards I&I work. So it doesn't have to be an or situation. All of those can support those types of projects.
The I&I grant, is that for rehabilitation of the infrastructure? Does it also cover inspection and assessment for I&I? Because a lot of times I&I is a really hard thing to track down, and normally most communities don't have the capability to do an inspection program. Does it cover the cost of possibly contracting out inspection and assessment of the system?
Yeah, it's so what we're looking at specifically on addressing the I&I, it could be that the smoke testing, the visual part of it can be costly to kind of contract out and discover what your I&I issues are. So it's really to find out what the I&I issues are, but not for construction or remediation of the I&I issues. That answer your question.
Yeah.
All right, I've got one more question from the chat from Justin Walker. It is understood that the lead service line replacement program is a loan program. However, if a community applied for this and qualified for principal forgiveness, would the community still have to pass a bond election or obtain judicial confirmation to use it?
If a community, say, it varies every year on how we allocate out the principal forgiveness, but if a community qualified for 100% principal forgiveness, then they would not have to go out for judicial confirmation or bonding. However, if, say, that community, we could only cover 50% of principal forgiveness for that project, then the other half that would be a loan and replace is the amount you would need to go out for judicial confirmation and debt authority for. So, for example, if it's a $10 million project, we were able to give that project $5 million in principal forgiveness. The $5 million would be to be paid back by the community. Then they would have to get authority for just that $5 million, but not the full $10 million project.
Is eligibility, applying, and funding cycle kind of all going hands in hand, and it's going to similar style to the first part of the presentation. We'll start with rural development and continue on that way.
Hopefully you can hear me okay. So moving on to rural development's eligibility, our application process, and going a little bit more into depth on some of those sub programs that I mentioned before. But in general, I'll just hit off the bat a couple basic eligibility requirements for our WEP, water and sewer funding. We only work with public bodies, nonprofits, and tribes. You have to be located in a community that's less than 10,000 or outside of a community, like in a rural area, unincorporated rural area would be eligible as well. As other funders have mentioned, they have to have the ability to legally obtain, give security, repay their loan. One of the big things that we have for eligibility is credit elsewhere. And what that means is that our program's set up not to compete with banks. So if the community can get a loan through a commercial lender at reasonable rates and terms to where their user rates won't be too high, then we are prohibited from participating. So we do that analysis, but just want to bring that up. Occasionally it comes up, but normally it's not an issue on these big projects. So more eligibility, they have to have the legal authority to incur the debt, and they have to own and operate the facility. So we can't give a loan to the friends of or some other organization. It has to be the organization that owns and operates those facilities. Can be declining in population, and part of the overall plan for orderly development. These are kind of few lesser important eligibility items, but we can use our funds for what we listed there, water and sewer, but we can also do solid waste and stormwater. And solid waste is one area that we have done several loans over the past couple of years. So that's kind of a new area that we're providing funding for. Okay, back to grant eligibility. Basically, you got to meet all the loan eligibility requirements, and then on top of that, these requirements for grant. As I mentioned, we went to the 2017 to 2021 ACS MHI data. So what that brought about was a new state benchmark. So I've referred to the state non-metro median household income. That's rural development's benchmark for grant. So if you're below that number, you are grant eligible for construction dollars up to 45%. Again, that's kind of a guardrail. There's other factors that we have to look at to determine grant eligibility. But then if you're below 80% of the state non-metro MHI, and you're relieving that health and sanitary concern, then you could be eligible up to 75%. And you also get the poverty interest rate with that. So, there's a couple pluses there. One of those other measures is the user rates. I think it's something that's in our regulation. We have to look at similar system cost. So, if your community is only paying $10 a month for water per household, you're probably not going to get a grant from us. So their rates are going to have to be closer to the $50 to $65 range before we start kicking grant in to keep those rates at what we consider similar system costs. So going into some of these sub-programs, EQUIG, pretty similar, under 10,000, just have to be below the state non-metro, only public bodies, nonprofits and tribes. This program is for, emergency situations, but as Dennis kind of pointed out, on his imminent threat program, we're similar. We're not going to come in there and fix your immediate problem. You're probably going to have to patch your system up, apply for our funding, and then we come in and do a permanent fix. This program can fund up to $1 million for source issues. And you have to basically show that you've had a significant decline in quality or quantity of water that's associated to some natural disaster or emergency event that happened. If to go after the source water dollars, that event had to happen within 2 years of your application. So some of the key points there for the Greg.
No, I had just a quick question back on the eligibility.
Sure.
User rates. So if a system came to you guys and they were, let's say they were at $40, but because of the improvements that they were going to have to do, it was going to double rates or, have to push above that. Is that in consideration, or is it just the rates at the time they come to you guys, or is it as a result of the project, if the rates go over that's 50 to 65, that would kick them into eligibility for grants?
Yeah, great question. And I guess I wasn't as clear as I should have been. So yes, it's not the rates that they're currently at. It's the rates that the post-project rate, what they would be after the project. So essentially we try to give them loan up to that point and then throw as much grant money in as we can to keep them at that similar system cost. So yes, this would be in consideration of the project that they're doing. And in some cases, we may have a multi-phase project. And so we can also work with that where maybe we give them a loan, but we're not quite to that rate, that we need. And then the next project is a loan and a grant. So, we can kind of phase stuff in if necessary. It makes it a little simpler if we can look at the whole thing. But, if you've got some of these projects are so large that they need to be spread out over several years. So we would take that into account even over those longer phased out construction schedules.
Thank you.
Is 10,000 population based on last census data?
10,000 populations based on the 2020 census. Yeah.
And then eligible rural area, is that not it? What is that?
So any community place under the census under 10,000 is eligible. If you're outside in an unincorporated area, those are all eligible areas.
I just had a question on the rates part of it, just for the 50 to 65. So is that combined water and sewer, or is that just, your water rate is over 50 or your sewer rate's over 50?
That is separate. So each individual water rate would be, 50 to 65 and the sewer rate 50 to 65.
Thank you.
Good questions. Anyone else?
But sewer rates up at 85, but your water's still down at 45.
Yeah, we can't, unfortunately, we can't take that in consideration, but yeah, it seems to be kind of more common that we're having difficulty keeping these systems rates at those similar system costs because the projects are so large, and then the grant funding is really, pretty scarce. So we do the best we can, and part of that's coordinating with these other federal agencies and state agencies to, bring in as much money to these projects as we can. But sometimes the reality is they may be over what we consider similar system costs. Planning grants. So I mentioned we had 2 planning grants programs. We do try to coordinate with DEQ. They have a little bit more planning grant dollars than we do. We used to get about 75,000 in each pot. We now get 125,000. So we've got a little bit more money to play with. I think last year we funded 9 planning grants, which is the most I've seen in 20 years. So, hopefully we'll continue that trend to get a little bit more planning grant dollars. I think that's important to help these communities get off the ground. But we have two separate programs. The first one's called the Pre-Development Planning Grant. Again, public bodies, nonprofits, tribes, under 10,000. The difference here is to be eligible for these grant dollars, you have to be below 80% of the state non-metro MHI, not just below the state non-metro. So have to be below 80%. The PPG grants were increased last year to up to 60,000 for an award. It was limited to 30, and it can cover up to 75% of the cost. Our other planning grant pot of money, the search planning grants, essentially the same, with the exception that the population limit's lowered to 2,500, and it can cover. It's limited to 30,000, the old number that we used to have for planning grants, and it can cover actually 100% of the cost if necessary. And we will kind of coordinate with DEQ and try to, a lot of times, even though we could cover 100%, we try to spread the money out and match their 50% and get as many planning grants funded as possible. Moving on to Native American set-aside, similar eligibility requirements. This has to be a federally recognized Native American tribe, population under 10,000 or in an eligible rural area, has to be under the 80% of the state non-metro. And this is recently increased to $4 million max, and it can cover 100% of the project costs. No match requirement. So that's significant. This has slowly, the max on this particular program's been climbing. So $4 million is the highest it's been. And so I think with projects and the costs that we're seeing, it's probably appropriate, and hopefully we can utilize this program a little more often. Just some miscellaneous requirements. They're not really eligibility related, but we do have AIS on all of our programs and BABA requirements that have to be met. We're still kind of getting our feet wet in BABA, so we're all going to go on this ride together, and I'm sure we'll learn a lot. But we don't really know all of the outcomes, but if you have any questions, reach out to our engineers. They're going to do a little presentation tomorrow, a little more in depth on BABA, so I'm not going to talk too much about it. We do have, related to those similar system costs, it's kind of this idea of our EDUs and how we calculate our EDUs. So all of our EDU counts and our underwriting have to be normalized to residential usage. So no matter how the community charges their commercial connections, we need data from the communities on usage, so we can compare, this commercial entity uses twice as much as a residential connection, so they're going to be 2 EDUs. And that's a very important part of our underwriting. So we ask for that on every project. And then we also have a thing we call short-lived assets. We want to make sure that, at least for the life of the loan, that the community is putting aside the right amount of money to replace pumps, recoat tanks, replace electrical components that will reach their useful life in that term of the loan. So we do ask for that and the facility plan. So those are a few things that we we're kind of different from the other agencies that we want to see in our facility plans, and I'm sure Kevin will kind of cover those a little bit tomorrow as well. And then back to application. Our application process is we're open year round, all year long. Come in, contact our specialist, apply anytime. I guess just realize that we are on a federal cycle, so our fiscal year starts October 1 and September 30th. So like this year, we're under a continuing resolution. We won't really have our full funding until either a full year CR or a budget's passed. So timing wise, I guess that's something to keep in mind as far as applying, but we accept applications all year round. We do have an electronic application process through Already Apply. Hopefully most of you are familiar with it, but the link's there. And that's how we take in all of our applications for these programs. But that's all I had. I will hand it off to the next speaker.
Thanks, Sol. Okay, back to CDBG.
Just your mic.
Okay, so what can community development block grant funds be used for? A lot of eligible activities that can be used for. So we start, our audience here and tomorrow is mostly water and sewer systems. So yes, CDBG can be used for water and sewer systems. We can also be used for fire and EMT stations. And that does include fire engines. So CDBG funds can be used to acquire fire engines. In fact, we got an application 2 weeks ago for fire engine. Can be used for CDBG can be used for hospitals and health facilities, infrastructure to affordable housing. We can't do the actual new construction of affordable housing, but we can be used for the infrastructure. Current project that we're doing in Mountain Home right now, we provided the water lines up to the site of that new development. Downtown improvement projects, I mentioned that, and those usually are ADA improvements on sidewalks, and it can be surface water drain from the lines and other element we are usually funding. We can make improvements at senior community centers, public parks, a big push on public parks. We had some additional funds come through CARES funding that we're using for public parks. So if you go through the PA and we've got a public park that they want to replace playground equipment or put in ADA improvements or a new restroom, to us. And the infrastructure for jobs. I mentioned the project earlier where we help put in fire lane road that'll allow the business to expand and create new jobs. Our funding can also help pay for design professional services and grant administration services that I talked about. And since Noah mentioned it, yes, we can also do solid waste. We've done a solid waste facility over in Eastern Idaho. So CDBG funds can be used if your community has solid waste facility. It's a little bit harder to become eligible, meeting that low to moderate income standard that I'll talk about. So we always like to throw out projects we've done recently, and these are in conjunction with other funding agencies. These are not wholly funded by CDBG. There's DEQ, Rural Development, core funding. There may be some bond bank in here too. So just be aware of that, but we always like to throw out projects that we've completed or done. And so throw that out. I mentioned this slide. I already talked about who's eligible. All right, let's talk about admission of application. So our public facilities, which are infrastructure set aside, those applications are due in November, and it's the Friday before Thanksgiving. So that if you haven't submitted it this round, you've got to wait a year and before you can submit. Post-disaster applications can be submitted at any time. So if you got a disaster, you can submit at any time. Now we do have set aside senior community centers, public parks. Well, those are in our brochure, but I didn't want to spend a little more time on infrastructure this presentation. Let's note, what is CDBG? One of the unique things with CDBG is that some federal programs, not all of them, but some federal programs who require non-federal match will allow CDBG to be counted as that non-federal match. So that's unique to our program. It's actually written in the statute. So you get a federal appropriation or federal money. Oh, that's great. Oh yeah, it's a grant. This is great. Oh, there's a match requirement tied to that. 20%. So you got $4 million. Now you can bring in 800,000. Not always easy for a water or sewer association to come up with that 800,000. CDBG could be that $800,000 match, or part of that $800,000 match requirement. So keep that in mind when you're working. Question over.
You have an example about this disaster. Yes, what that would qualify for that kind of.
We had a recent, well, not recent, about a year and a half ago, an earthquake that damaged district water distribution line. And it kind of cracked and caused they're losing a lot of their treated water. And so they submitted to us, and based on the fact that they were able to prove that it was an earthquake, and they damaged their infrastructure because they showed kind of before and after what was happening. You could, it's obviously underground, but you could see how the road now was saturated. So, and then, so that was one project we did. That was in conjunction with RD and DEQ. We're also on the table for that one as well. And now we have another one that just came in, Danny, right? That was an earthquake too that caused issues with their well and kind of threw that alignment on their well. So we're just starting to look at them. And we've had some landslides and some fires that have damaged public infrastructure. And I always tell staff there's always potential for volcanic activity, right? Because I've always, Dante's Peak, I still have the movie poster up. Because Commerce used to have the film bureau, and we had the movie Dante's Peak that was filmed in all this. Long story. But so we can be used match. Method of distribution, it is a competitive process. So you are competing statewide. So it is, just because you submit doesn't mean you're going to get funded. And you want to make sure you're checking all those boxes, meeting all the requirements that we're looking for. We don't have enough funds to cover demand. Applications are reviewed by staff. Then we have a funding council we present them to. It's called Economic Advisory Council, or EAC. And then they make the recommendations that go to the governor, and the governor makes the final decision on the funding. Competitive factors we're looking at, obviously match. We want to see communities have a buy-in to their project. So if they've passed a bond or gotten judicial confirmation or bringing cash to the table, that's identifying that, yes, they have a buy-in to this project as well. Need, it's always that argument. The higher they need, the more competitive they're going to be. Yes, that's how we look at it. We just don't have enough money to cover everybody. So, there are those systems that are out trying to get in front of the potential issue. And why aren't they scoring higher? Well, because they're not as big of a need as some of these systems that are starting to fall apart. Readiness to proceed. One thing we're looking, yes, you have to have a facility plan in place. It should be completed or at least submitted to the regulatory agencies. We want to make sure they've got a design professional, or at least in the process of hiring a design professional. Same with grant administrator. Other funds committed. Where are their other funds? Are they in place? Are they just talking about it, or do they have actual loan grant agreements in place, or some sort of commitment in place? Control of property is another element to look at. We're looking at. They don't have to own all the property, but it definitely helps to know what properties you need to acquire, and are you starting to work with that property owner? Sometimes when agencies, cities, or associations are trying to acquire property, and that person finds out they just got a grant, that property value goes up quite a bit. So, it's just, if you have control of the property, it does get a little bit on water and sewer. You get into easements, and sometimes it's a matter of just finding out where these water or sewer lines are. Are they in front of the non-subject's property line? Do we have a permanent easement in place? So to qualify for the money, you heard me use this term called national objective. So that's majority of our projects on sewer, water, have to benefit a community that's at least 51% low to moderate income. So we look at an area-wide element. We're identifying, we look at the city. We go to our census data that we already have that tells us if they're over 51%. If they are, government might qualify. We can allow, if some cities are at 46, 47% LOI, and they think in the last 7 to 8 years, the economics have changed, or there's something that is not comfortable because you're using ACS data, which does take a smaller sample size, they can do an income survey, find out, are they going to, or do they come in over that 51%? So your service area has to be, a water association or a water district or city has to be serving an area that's at least 51% below the moderate income. There are some other factors, but limited clientele, that's for senior centers, jobs, that's if we're doing job creation and housing, else we're doing a housing project. But for water and sewer, we're looking for that area-wide benefit, has to be at least 51% or higher below the moderate income. If we're going to do a post-disaster, this is what we're looking at. You have your natural events, flood, fire, landslide. Is it an immediate threat to the community health and welfare? And the unique thing, what I like, is recent origin for us is 12 months. So you had the earthquake. You don't have to come to us within 4 to 5 weeks to see if you can be eligible for money. You can look 12 months down the road. Hopefully by then you've come up with more of a, not the Band-Aid approach, but more of the permanent fix, which is where our money fits best when we're trying to do that permanent fix. If it's drilling that new well, if it's pulling out the old water line and putting it, that's where we're us. We look, they have to make a declaration of emergency, either by the city, county, or state, and it cannot be because of result of deferred maintenance or end of life cycle. The pump went out and now we're not able to provide the water, community potable water, but you find out the pump's 45 years old, it's probably at the end of its life cycle. So that's not going to qualify. Procurement, these are the things that come with our program to keep, when city receives CDBG funding, it's something they should be looking at as they're putting the application together. We do require full and open competition for the services that we're going to fund with our CDBG funds. That includes grant administrators. It does include design professionals. Have they gone through, has the community, water district, or the city gone through the QBS process, qualification-based system? Are they using an RFP to go out and find those engineering services? So that's what we're looking at. If they want us to fund engineering services, that's one of the first things we're looking at. Did you do the QBS process? They can't use cost as a variable to determine if they're going to hire that engineering firm. It has to be based on qualifications. Construction, that has to be full and open competition. Identify their invitation to bid, which has to go to the lowest responsive and responsible bidder. I probably should have put on this slide too, is CDBG, we can look at, if you're looking at possibly doing design build, that might be something we could look into with you, or a construction manager, general contractor approach. So we do have some flexibility there. It doesn't have to be that design bid build structure. We can look at other methods if that's something the community thinks is to their advantage, and want to maybe pursue that. And then have on there supply and delivery, which this is most likely, probably not so much water and sewer projects, but if we're going to do some of our other eligible activities like playground equipment, or I guess restrooms is one thing. We sometimes will just do a prefab restroom that they do a supply and delivery for. So we require environmental reviews. Our objective here is to notify the public and the government about your project and assess your project's environmental impacts. The HUD process, typical of most federal environmental reviews, but HUD has added provisions. Remember I mentioned about the housing focus. So they want to understand about explosive hazards and noise, which gets a little quirky if you're doing a water tank. Like, why are we worried about that? But that's part of, the HUD focus. And just because other federal agencies have completed their environmental review process doesn't mean CDBG process is complete. We all have a little different process. And I mentioned earlier, CDBG, the odd thing with us, the unique thing, I don't know if it's on, is the mayor and the county commissioner have to sign off on the environmental review. So that's unique to CDBG. So keep that in mind, because you'll hear, well, DEQ completed the environmental review. They signed off on it. It should be good. You can take a lot of that information that was done in that environmental review and apply it towards ours. But we may have a different public comment period than what DEQ requires or what RD requires. And so there's some different steps in there that people need to be aware of. Property acquisition, one thing with CDBG, if you use our funding to acquire property, maybe you need a new site for, a new lot for the tank, or you're buying, you have easements that need to go in place. You do have to follow the Uniform Act, and that's to ensure the property owner is treated fairly, as cities have potential for eminent domain, but they have to, you have to be fairly compensated, the property owner. Federal labor standards, another requirement that comes with our funding. Protecting and ensuring the rights of construction workers related to Davis-Bacon and related acts, they're paid a minimum rate. If CDBG is paying for a portion of construction, it can be, 90% of we're paying for construction or 10%, it does kick in Davis-Bacon requirements. If CDBG is in the project and we're only paying for design professional or demonstration services, Davis-Bacon for us is not applicable. So sometimes we'll team up with rural development on a project. They're paying for construction, we're paying for engineering. That does not kick in Davis-Bacon in that project. That's RD, DEQ will likely kick in Davis-Bacon. So just kind of recognize it's just funding agencies and their requirements. So there is some benefit to doing that. It's not necessarily just to stay away. Well, we don't want to pay that Davis-Bacon wage rate, which, there's an administration component to dealing with Davis-Bacon. But also our money sometimes can, if we're teamed up with RD, our money can move a little bit quicker towards helping to pay those engineering fees than RDs can, because they're typically waiting for the bids to come in. We don't have to wait for a bid to reimburse for engineering services. Financial management, I won't go into a lot of detail there, but we definitely want to make sure the grantees we're working with, we'll be working with cities that are 40,000 in population, and then the Water Association that's 200 people. We want to make sure that they're not going to go away. So we do look at and make sure they've done audit requirements and subrecipient agreements. And then citizen participation, we do require a public hearing prior to submission of the application. So citizens are aware you're applying for these CDBG funds, and there's another public hearing midway through the project. As I mentioned earlier, the money comes from HUD and their, the promotion of the fair housing. One thing we've been pushing on our communities a lot is the fair housing assessment to complete that. One big thing we always hear about, right, in the last 3 years is housing prices throughout the entire state and how high they are. So we're trying to push these communities to look at diversifying their housing stock, looking at potential ADUs, accessory dwelling units, making sure that's might be an eligible zoning or requirement. And so we do push that a little bit on these communities. The other thing that comes with the grant, I talked about this too, is ensuring what we're looking at here a lot of times is their transition plan. Communities were required to meet ADA accessibility back starting in 1991. Put a lot of money in to get all your sidewalks and all your facilities up to ADA compliance, but we're trying to help them do that. And we're always, when we find them, want to know where they are in their ADA transition plan. And we can use the money to help them make those improvements. Just improvements. Another thing that comes with the program, I call this equal access. You'll hear us talk about Section 3, which is very similar but different than the DBE program that you'll hear DEQ talk about. But we require both, or we're trying, goals are trying to help disadvantaged business or lower income individuals get jobs or contract opportunities on these CDBG funded projects. And then we do require grantees to do those limited proficiency analysis to see if they have to develop a bigger plan. So that's CDBG and the requirements that come with it. On to the next presenter.
All right, with the Section 595 program, it is anybody who is eligible who is a public entity. So it can be the cities, the counties, public school districts, water and sewer districts, Native American tribes. A lot of people ask us about homeowners associations. They are not eligible unless they are part of a larger sewer district. And we've had several of them that have moved to go into to join a sewer district so that they could be eligible for additional funding. Next slide, please. We work with all of the people who've been talking here, particularly, we work very closely with Rural Development, the Commerce CDBG, and the IDEQ. And we base a lot of it on the need, obviously. If there's an emergency kind of situation, we don't have emergency funding, but we do work with the other agencies to come in after the fact, as Dennis was saying, kind of, I think he was, we come in after the fact and we'll come in and do the complete repair as opposed to the repair that's been just tacked together to make it work until they can get funding. As I mentioned before, it is a cost share program, so it's 75% federal, 25% non-federal, and I think we've gotten the okay from all of the agencies here, just about, to use their funds as match for our funds. So we work very closely with them. And again, just as Dennis was saying, we'll tack on to a loan that has been made by RD or IDEQ so that we can use their funds as the match for our funds so that the community isn't out a whole lot of money. Next slide, please. Our fiscal year, we're with the government, so it's October 1 through September 30. And this program is only funded when the presidential budget is passed. So as long as we're on a continuing authority, there's no funding for this program. We typically choose our projects somewhere between July through September. We choose to prioritize them in our national database, although it changes as new criteria come up, and they can be submitted throughout the year. So it doesn't really make that much difference when you submit your project. You just know that you're going to go into the database and you'll be prioritized based on the criteria that the whole group has selected, and we'll move forward from there. Next slide, please. And we are the easiest of the organizations to apply to. All it takes is a letter of interest. And it needs to have just a brief description of the project and an estimate of the total project costs and an understanding that it is a cost share program. You can send it to me in letter form at that address, or you can do it as an email. And I've also added my boss, Cindy Bowen, who is the chief of our planning branch, because not only do we have the Section 595 program for the wastewater and water, we have a lot of other programs where we may be able to help you with aquatic ecosystem restoration or a variety of other things. And Cindy is a pro at answering questions about our other cost share programs that you can be involved with. And I think that is all of my slides. If anybody has any questions.
Right, I am back up to talk about DEQ's programs here. Hearing some of the other presentations, I realize I haven't gone over a little bit more about our match requirements. So I think I'll just off the cuff kind of go over that just a little bit. With our loans, there's no match requirements. We can fund 100% of a project. One thing that I will note, when you are joint funding with some of these other agencies or some other program that you may bring in, if you are required to maybe have a local match, non-federal share for that, please notify us, especially if you're getting a loan, and we can direct some of our recycled dollars to your project instead of direct grant dollars from EPA. If we have the recycled dollars used, it's considered state dollars. It's essentially has been washed of its federalness. Even though how we operate, we do have to meet federal requirements, but we can wash those direct funds and make those state dollars so they can be a local match share. Now, under our grant program, with the planning grants, we do require 50% match for the project costs. Now, since this is a state-directed planning grant program, we don't have any requirements of where that other funding comes from. So if it's federal money that you're bringing in, just like bringing in some search grant dollars from rural development, that's federal money. That doesn't matter to us. It doesn't matter if it's federal or state dollars or local dollars that you're bringing in to cover your 50%. The stormwater overflow, it's 20% local match, which I haven't looked at my notes. Does it have to be non-federal? Do you remember? It does have to be non-federal with that, the 20% state match on there. And then the Lead in Schools grant, that's 100% federal. There's no match requirement on there. Now, for eligibilities, for the Clean Water SRF program, we can direct funds to government entities and nonprofit corporations that have the authority to collect, treat, and dispose of sewage or industrial waste. The projects that we can go towards is any wastewater system improvements, new systems, non-point source pollution control projects, and also definitely if you're improving your system to address some water, energy efficiencies and conservation. For the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, we can direct funds to community water systems, nonprofit, non-community water systems. Now, the community water systems, that can be private for-profit. So it's a little bit different than on the clean water side. The projects that we can fund, water system rehabilitation, consolidations. We can also do projects for treatment, storage, and your distribution systems, and pretty much anything you need to do to get into compliance under the Safe Drinking Water Act. Now, for us, with those eligibilities, we do try to incorporate with all the funding that we're getting. So if it qualifies for SRF, then it can qualify under the planning grants and some of our other grants that we have. Now, in order to for DEQ to get grants from EPA, we do have to submit what we call an intended use plan to EPA to get these grants. And so there's some requirements in that intended use plan that we have to have. We definitely have to outline what federal laws are implemented. We have to put out our annual plan, like how are we going to spend our money, our goals. We do have to list our priority list in the intended use plan and our fundable list. We mentioned how we do our disadvantaged communities. So we pretty much lay out kind of everything we do to spend out this money. Since we have to do this intended use plan for the state revolving fund, again, we kind of time-wise and try to kind of keep consistent between the other grant programs. We put everything in line. So our planning grants, we create a priority list at the same time as we do the intended use list. And this is kind of our timeline structure. We do have this on our website. We have it in our handbook. We try to keep our process the same every year. So for example, this year we're starting to, in January, we'll start to create this plan for how we're going to spend money for the next state fiscal year. So we have this structure where we kind of start in October, make our letters of interest available, when our deadlines are, how we're going to review it. But I'm going to go through each of these steps a little bit more closely. But we do try to keep this process the same every year. We know it can kind of be complex to get through this process, so we try to be as consistent as possible every year, so you know exactly how we're going to operate. Now, for our letters of interest and to create our priority list, these are some items that we really look at on how we rank each of the letters of interest. So we really we look at the public health issues, regulatory compliance. There are some incentives. We do look at affordability to add some points. And we also look at the project, or what kind of improvements are you making, you know, that can drive some efficiencies with the system. So those are some added points that we look at too in creating our priority list. So in October, we put out our variety of priority lists. So we have one for about each funding that we have out. We do try to keep the letters of interest as consistent between each other as possible. So so you kind of know how you need to fill it out. So one year, if you come for us for a drinking water project, you kind of know the format. And then next year, if you come to us for a wastewater project, essentially kind of know the project, how to fill this out, and information that we'll be looking for. I'm going to back on this just a little bit. In January is when the letters of interest are due. We then rank them in February through March, and then we put out the ranking and the intended use plan out for public comment, and usually that's going to be around April, May timeframe. We could put it out from, depending on the timing, we try to put it out for around 3 weeks to get public comments on the rating. So not only do we rate it internally, we do work with our regional engineers to rank all the priority list. We go through each letter of interest to give them points. We have a process to make sure that we're consistent throughout the state on how we're reviewing each of those letters of interest. But we also have that public comment period where you can look at it, you can ask for rating forms, you can see how we rated it, you can compare it to how we rated the other system, so you can see the consistency and the fairness that we really try to establish for our rating process. Once we go through the public comment piece, we prepare the priority list and the intended use plans for the DEQ board for their approval, and then we notify everyone who submitted a letter of interest in June what the final word was from the board. But essentially, there's not a lot of changes usually that we've seen from the intended use plan and what we put out for priority lists out to what gets approved to the board. We really have a nice system in place that seems to catch all those little things, and you'll see that the process is pretty fair. And this is a breakdown of our states in our 6th region, but over the years, you'll see money, our priority list system seems to really work. We really have gotten money everywhere throughout the state with our current process. Now, once you go through the priority list process, you get ranked, we will notify you and let you know, okay, now we have money available for you, but the work's not quite done here. We do have you fill out an application. So for the planning grants, we do have an application we'll need you to fill out. It just kind of clarifies what your project scope is, who's working on it. We double check the contract between you and the engineer to see specifically what we're paying for with the planning grants. And this kind of lays out some of the information that we ask. We do that on the loan side as well. There's some additional stuff that we ask for, but again, we try to keep our applications somewhat similar. Some of the stuff we have on the loan side may be a little bit more. We just need to make sure you have the debt authority to take out a loan, and there are some additional EPA reporting requirements we have, and so we gain that information so we can report out to EPA. Then once we review your application, we then will send out the actual grant offer. So this makes everything official. With the planning grants, I do want to say, grant offer needs to be signed before you incur any debt or any cost, excuse me. So you do want to make sure you have this in place, and it's essentially just covers what we're going to pay and how to meet the requirements of the planning grant. Again, with the loans, we do have a loan offer we put out. That's what makes it official that money is ready to be spent. On the loan side, we do have a little bit more flexibility because we understand sometimes you might need to start moving a project forward, but you might not have the funding or the dotted line kind of signed. Please notify us. Let us know if you have some timing issues. We try to work with you. There might be some costs that you might have to incur before we give you the loan offer. If you get prior approval, we'll cover those costs that you may incur. And this list out here, one thing you'll find on the loan offers, it'll let you know whether your project, and we also put it in the intended use plan, but this will confirm it, whether your project needs to comply with either American Iron and Steel or with BABA requirements. Something you'll also see is whether your project, well, I'll let you know this, if your project is outlined to fall where you need to comply with BABA requirements, you also need to comply with the Single Audit Act. So please know that. And then American Iron and Steel, again, is another federal requirement you might have to follow if you don't have to do BABA. And on all of our loans, we do have a Davis-Bacon requirement for our loans. Now, our handbook kind of lays this all out for you, so please use this as reference. Everything I've gone over, it goes into detail too, and kind of helps you, guide you through our process. And again, if you have any questions, just direct it towards us. And if you need some help, you need help filling out the letters of interest, or you need help filling out that loan application, again, let us know. We have some contracts, but we also know a few associations that are getting funding to help you do that to get the state revolving fund program. So let us know, and we'll get people out to help you through the process. Oh, some fun pictures. This is us getting some money with the governor and our staff, and yeah, we're here to help you.
Okay, so back to the bond bank authority. What types of bonds can be issued through the IBBA? We issue revenue bonds, be it water revenue, sewer, or general fund revenues. Also can issue general obligation bonds or financings authorized through judicial confirmation. So similar to selling bonds on their own, an issuer needs to have the legal authority to sell its bonds through the IBBA as evidenced by a legal opinion from the bond attorney. So either through voter approval or judicial confirmation. You have to have one of those two in order to get through the bond bank authority. Next, we'll go through who can participate, what you need to do to prepare for IBBA requirements, the application process, and a breakdown of costs. So who can participate? Any municipality is defined by Idaho Code 678702 can utilize the bond bank program. This includes any political subdivision, cities, towns, counties, school districts, or other special districts, water and sewer, public health, irrigation, or soil conservation districts. Per the bond bank's lending policies, we do not allow local improvement districts to utilize the program. What you need to prepare for our requirements, as I mentioned, you need to obtain either voter authorization to issue the debt or judicial confirmation. You have to show debt service coverage, either historical net system revenues of 1.25 times debt service, or if it's a projected project, they need to be 1.5 times or 1.25 times net system revenue with professional certification. As I mentioned earlier, the interest rate environment that we find ourselves in, there's not a whole lot of opportunity for refinancing or refunding debt right now. But in the event that we get back there, which, eventually we will, it's all cyclical. We require a minimum net present value savings of 5% of refunding par, which is pretty much industry standard on that front. And the present value savings must be greater than or equal to the negative arbitrage. So the amount you're borrowing to pay your debts, your higher interest rate back, the amount that the difference between what your borrowing earns to offset that amount. Net present value savings has to be larger than that amount. As far as the application process, completing the application, and this is on our website, you can find the application on there. You provide a summary of the purpose of the borrowing, including the amount needed and the timing of the project. Provide the last 3 years audited financial statements, the current and next year's fiscal year budget, any loan documents of any current outstanding debt that has the same revenue pledge as what you're asking for a loan from the bond bank for. Contact information, be it city officials, your bond counsel, an underwriter if you have one, or a financial advisor if you have one that you're using. And then also we require a $500 application fee at the time the application is submitted. As far as the cost for the bond bank, there's a couple different. You have the participant level costs, which you'll incur on your own, be that your local bond counsel. As part of using the program, we do charge 10 basis points on the total debt service, less the application fee. So if your application is approved, when we calculate that 10 basis point fee on the debt service, we reduce it by the $500 for the application fee that was already submitted. Local financial advisor, not required, but if you do use one, that's a cost that you'll incur on your own. And then a local paying agent, which also isn't needed because we have our own paying agent. The bond bank cost of issuance. So these are the ones that I mentioned before that are shared for the economies of scale. So the bond bank's bond counsel, our financial advisor, the rating from Moody's, any underwriter discount. So the amount we have to pay the underwriter to sell the bonds in the market. Our paying agent, and any miscellaneous expenses. Those will all be shared throughout the parties that are inside of this bond issue. As far as the bond issuance process, there's document preparation, roles and responsibilities. So once everybody's in the deal and gets approved, it's one big team. We all work together with bond counsel to review all the necessary documents and agreements. We work with our financial advisor as well as the local advisors. There could be multiple in the deal, but as I mentioned, it's a team effort to get the debt issued and get the money in the hands of the communities that need it. The bond pricing, we'll either do a competitive or a negotiated sale. So if a participant comes to the bond bank and they don't have an underwriter that they want to use, we might go out for a competitive issue. So we'll go out to market and you'll have multiple underwriters come in and bid on it, kind of a Dutch auction type of event. So they just bid on where they think they can sell the bonds versus a negotiated where if it's a chosen underwriter, they'll go out to the market using their underwriter, their own underwriting desk to sell the bonds in the market. And sometimes competitive, if it's a more simple type issue, it's easier to do that way. If it's a little bit more complicated, negotiated sale is sometimes more beneficial. I have the closing of the bond issue, which will provide all the legal counsel with signed originals in order to close the deal. And then we have the timing of the events. So IBABA staff and advisors will review the applications. They'll be presented to the board based on a calendar for approval. After approval, the staff will work the participant and representatives to issue the bond based on a quarterly issuance schedule. And any approved applicants can expect to receive financing from the bond bank authority based on a quarterly issuance schedule. And we kind of put this in place. It used to be, we would just go out to market whenever we would get applications in and approved, but we found it might be, more beneficial that if we can have a schedule out there that people can better plan in their communities of, when they need funding, when they can hit these months of issue that we have lined out. So typically now we issue the end of January, end of April, end of July, and end of October, so on a quarterly basis. But those application deadlines being November 30th, so end of November, end of February, end of May, and end of August. So we'll have the board meetings to approve applications, typically the third Monday of December, March, June, and September, and then a meeting to approve the resolutions if those bonds are, or if those applications are accepted, the third Monday of January, April, July, and October. Any questions on that? Justin?
Justin, let me know if it's bad. So I made a couple of notes, but starting off with our loan eligibility, this generally covers everybody who's eligible. It defines the state code. Kind of an important thing that I meant to put in here and didn't. Municipalities are eligible for loans and grants and for regional sustainability programs, but with the aging infrastructure grants, municipal projects have been excluded. And that's only because it's generally more ag focused, but cities can apply and they have been awarded. So kind of looking through, these are generally our biggest customers. More often than not, it's irrigation districts and irrigation canal companies, but we've done business with all of those. These are some of our eligible projects that we've seen lately. One that I had meant to add that we talked about earlier, lately we've been kind of working as a bridge loan through NRCS. So we've had applicants get awarded NRCS funds, but because the project has to be done before they can release funds, they'll come to us to get kind of a bridge loan for this most recent one was 2 years. Realistically, they'll be done in June. Funds will then be released from NRCS to pay us back, and then they can work through the grant cycle with them. So delivery systems, this bottom picture is actually an HOA up north. Beeline homeowners, I would say it is. But it's a water filtration to remove contaminants. This is kind of a flow chart of our loan process. To kind of shortcut this whole thing, I'll tell you a secret. I am the point of contact for the entire state. So if you have a question, my phone number's on here. You're stuck with me. Give me a call. I'll help you out. I also help our grants coordinator, and generally we try to teamwork it. So if you've got a question about one of the grants, you can also give me a call. And actually, just to back up, there were a couple of notes that I did want to point out that I didn't think to include. We don't use BABA and we don't use American Iron and Steel, so we don't have those requirements. And we don't generally have a public comment period. We do allow for public comment at board meetings, but generally, if there's a loan or a grant, you're stuck with me and only me. So getting started, you can work with us, and that's our contact information, really it's me. We can help you determine the scope of the project. And for our grants, we've actually got IWRB grants. The email address is only a couple of people. We can help you determine the scope of work. or we've had applicants show up with it. We can help gather required documentation. For the most part, we see applicants show up with most of this list, and we can help out where we can. But by the time it gets to us, they've got a lot of this lined out already. These are requirements for the loan program. It's a lot more similar to DEQ than I actually thought about. So we do require a couple of years of financial statements. Got to know that you can pay back the loan. Got to know that you can incur debt. For our grant programs, really, it's what's your project? What's the cost? Do you have cost share in hand? It's a lot easier. Once we get the application for the loan program, we review it. I work with the applicants to make sure we get all the documentation we need. We start getting questions answered that we know we're going to get from the board. Once we are in a good spot about 30 days before the next meeting, we'll get everything finalized, and then we'll get it to the board for presentation. The first round will go to our finance committee for approval. It's 5 people. It's a subset of the board. They look through it. They ask questions. If they have things that we need to work on, we'll take it back and revise the application. If we get their seal of approval, then we take it to the board. And these are the every other month meetings. And the application, again, is reviewed. Generally, by the time it hits the board, most of our questions have been answered, problems have been worked out, and funding is approved through a resolution. With our grant program, it's a little bit different. We get the applications in at the deadline. They're reviewed and scored by our grants teams. And then that list will be taken to the board for review. And it's approved based on the funding cap. So we fund everybody as best we can. And we have some requirements spreading it out across the state. So we try not to spend more than 50% in any one segment of the state. But if we do come in under the round cap, we can generally fund it all. With the exception of this last round, we had an applicant and it was just a person, and they wanted to set up some irrigation and start farming on a 40-acre parcel that they had owned. But because they didn't meet the eligibility requirements, and because we don't have a lot of public benefit, that one wasn't funded. Not to say it can't happen, but it did this last time. That should take us right to the break.
I think we just had one quick question in the chat, so I'll address that and then move on, and then the rest of the questions can be at the end. But it was for Noel from Carrie, and push rates too high. What is considered too high?
Say that again.
Push rates are too high. What is considered too high?
Push rates?
I think that's what she said. It had to do with your rates information. What is considered too high? Push rates are too high. What is too high?
Yeah, I'm not sure what a push rate is. Maybe she could clarify the question.
We'll just finish up really quick because it's not a lot of slides for this last topic, and then we'll come back.
Okay, thanks. All right, so we're getting down to the end. Your loan and grant's been approved, and now what? So for rural development, we are pretty closely involved with the community, the engineers, throughout the process from beginning to end. As I mentioned before, we have 2 engineers on staff that will review all of the documents. They'll help walk you through our procurement requirements. We'll be there through construction, all the way to the end of the project, and even might show up at your warranty inspection a year after it's done. So we have our specialists that are around the state that really are our boots on the ground, and they're a great resource for you. So use them as much as you can. One thing I wanted to note is RD does track all of the funding in the project, regardless, if there's 4 funding agencies, we don't just track our own funding. So we need to be involved with all of the pay application request, or at least copied on those so we can kind of keep up to speed. And one of the pending regulation changes that we have coming will actually allow us to set our interim financing up earlier in the process. So we can, maybe capture some of those pre-design or design costs. And so I think it's even more important that we're involved and are kept in the loop on all those pay applications. And then the last thing is, our engineers are free. So if you ever have questions, call them and use them as a resource as well. My last slide is basically looking at our staffing again, and they really are the resource for everyone out there. And then I'll put one more plug in for the Blackfoot office positions. If you're interested, that'll be posted here in the next week or so. Thank you.
For CDBG, don't necessarily look at the slides because I was probably approval. Now what? I'm still in the approval stage on some of these slides. So you get approved, EAC reviews it, recommends the governor recommends award. You'll get an award letter from us. What does that entail? First thing is we want you to complete a financial form, about a 2-page form. We have the grantee complete to make sure we understand your financial processes, and we may request an audited financial at that time. Usually we'll request them earlier, but we may also request it at that time. And then you can start your environmental review process. You've probably already done some of the scoping on it already, or you probably, if you have DEQ or development funding, have started that under some of the facility planning or maybe other steps within the process that get going on the environmental review. If some of our environmental reviews, if it's exempt, maybe we're just in the engineering and administration. That's very quick. It's 3 pages and you can get it done probably in about an hour. If we're bigger project and new construction, you might be into a FONSI, what we call a FONSI. So now you're doing a 90-day, usually 90 days. There's probably comment periods associated with that, and that can require additional steps. Maybe it's an archaeological review or biological assessment that may be required. Most of our projects kind of fall in the middle if we're in construction. Category exclusions, the title we use, which depending if there are any environmental mitigation measures made or not require public comment. So always make that, recognize you've got this environmental review you have to do, and that's going to maybe change some of your project design. Will also take more time before you're going to put it out to bid. We have once those steps are done, we have, we'll send you, we get it, we review it, we're good with it and concur with it. Let the mayor or the county commissioner signed off on, then we'll send out our funding agreement. If you're a subrecipient, we're also expecting the subrecipient agreement to be signed at that time. So if you're working with a water district, sewer district, we want to see that agreement in place. So those are the steps we start to do. And then after that, start moving forward with either in design or, when you're in design, maybe you start moving towards getting the project up. So those are the steps after procedure.
Once you receive funding, cost share funding from the Corps of Engineers, I will sit down with your project engineer and negotiate a scope of work, which our commander will then approve. And then we work towards a project partnership agreement, which is the actual meat of the agreement, saying that, it's a 25% non-federal sponsor, a 75% federal cost, and we'll sign that agreement. The commander then executes the agreement, and the funding is obligated to the city and the project. And it's there until such time as either the project is completed or that you come back to us and tell us that you're not going to be able to do it. So it's yours once we obligate it. What we need to do is several reviews. We do a complete environmental compliance review. which we use as much information as we can if you're being funded by one of the other agencies as well, so we don't duplicate things. We also have a short public review, which we can shorten if there's been a public review done elsewhere. And Annalee, are you on? Because I don't know if the latest CEQ stuff has been signed off. She may not be on. We also have you turn in all of your plans and specs, and we do a complete engineering design review within the ProjNet Dr. Checks system. Our Cultural Resources Group will do a complete Section 106 survey response thing with all of the local tribes and historical preservation offices, and determine that there is no danger of running into, or no expectation of running into, any cultural resource material. And then we also do a real estate review, which again, if we're doing this with other groups, if we're funding with other groups, we'll possibly be able to get most of the information from them. Once that's all done and we're ready to roll, and I should also say, this changes if we're only funding design. If we're only funding design, we just have to do the engineering design review. And I know we talked about BABA and American Iron and Steel in the last thing. At this point, we have no requirements for those either, just Davis-Bacon. Anyway, once you start asking us for reimbursement, you submit a form that we will give you, and then along with the appropriate invoices and a copy of the payment check for the work, and we will reimburse at 75% of the approved costs until the total amount is reached or the project is completed. That's it.
Right, DEQ's next. One thing that I'm going to get into a little bit of our loan closeout. That's the biggest piece where the grant loan bureau really gets involved. But with these projects, anytime you're doing an upgrade to or changes to drinking water, wastewater system, you will need to involve DEQ in some matter in the review. So just keep that in mind. Even if you don't get a grant or loan with DEQ, DEQ will need to review plans and specs before you make those changes to make sure the upgrades meet federal requirements. But for the loan, what we do is we will be assigning a regional engineer or project engineer to your project. So tomorrow they'll go definitely in depth, once we give you the loan offer, how to kind of go through the project. So our engineers will kind of go into the engineering requirements to your project being built. We are involved at the state office. Usually we double check when those reimbursement requests come in. So with all the projects, we pay the communities back after the costs have been incurred. So once you get those invoices for your project upgrades, you submit them to us and we give you the money to pay those. So we do, again, work with our regional engineers to review those reimbursement requests. It comes to our fiscal department to pay out. So we pay as the project goes along. Now, when it gets towards the end of the project, we do withhold the last 5% of the project just to make sure we receive all the documentation we require with this loan. Sometimes for example, when we do the loan application, we'll look to see if you have a customer service policy, maybe I'm trying to think of some other ones. There might be some documentation we may need, or on the environmental side, there's some stuff that you need to do. We kind of just make sure all of that stuff happens before we pay out the last 5%. And also our regional engineers will review the project to make sure it was built as planned as well. So there will be a final site inspection. Once that happens, we usually work with your bond attorney to close out the loan, and we pay out the last 5%, and then your loan will then go into repayment. Your first payment is usually due 6 months after we close out the project, state everything's completed, and we get your bond in hand as collateral or your promissory note, and then your payment is 6 months from there. And again, I just have our staff here. Definitely you can email here, but when your project is going on, you will have a regional engineer that can assist you. But if you're not quite sure who that is, again, you can use our general email, and we'll make sure you're connected to the right person to help walk you through that project. Okay, all right, that's it for me.
So for the Bond Bank Authority, once you received your loan from the authority, we do have some responsibilities: the payment timing, continued disclosure, and annual surveillance. So all the bond payments for our borrowers are due on March 15th and September 15th, just to keep it consistent with everybody. And we require that those debt service payments are paid to our paying agent, which is IN's Bank at the moment, 15 days prior to the bond payment date. So your September 15th payments due September 1st, your March 15th is due March 1st. And the reason we do that is because we need to leave lead time in the event that you can't make your debt service payment, that we can go out and either use the state intercept. So if your municipality is going to be receiving money from the state, be it revenue sharing, election consolidation, any of those type of payments that the municipality receives from the state, we will step in and intercept that money to make your debt service payment for you in the event that your payment's not made by these dates. And in the event that there's not a state payment being made at the time your payment's due, that's when we'll use the sales tax revenue to make that debt service payment. And once we use the sales tax revenue, we'll then go back and intercept any future revenue that's coming to you to repay the debt service payment. Knock on wood, it hasn't happened yet, and hopefully it never does. Continuing disclosure, this applies more to the existing bond bank participants. We require audited financial statements, a current year budget, and the Exhibit D1, which is a document inside of our loan agreement that says you're in compliance with submitting these documents to the Bond Bank Authority. And these are due to the disseminating agent 6 months after the end of the fiscal year. And the reason I say this applies to current is because back in, I think it was 2014 or 15, MSRB changed the rules for this to you have to be an obligated person within the program. So you have to make up 10% basically of the program to be considered an obligated person. So if you're not at that 10%, then you're not required for this continuing disclosure piece of it. We do require any material events be disseminated to the dissemination agent not more than 10 days after the event happens. We do have annual surveillance for all of our participants. So usually around April, we'll send out an email or a letter to the contacts on the borrowings, asking them the list of questions, the status of your revenue pledge, your system revenue coverage to make sure you're maintaining at 1.25 times coverage of your debt service. If you have a debt service reserve fund, have you had to use that to make your debt service payments? Again, the continuing disclosure compliance, if applicable, any arbitrage or rebate compliance or any litigation or other issues that the bond bank should be aware of. Just our contact information if you all have any questions that you think of afterwards, and more than happy to answer any questions.
So not to say that we covered the first page of DEQ's homework, but a lot of ours are really pretty similar. So once the loan's approved through a resolution, we start working through contract documents. We've lined out the terms, the scope, the duration, everything else. We will put security, we'll file securities, we'll file liens, get all that in place. And contract documents, we'll get into forms for disbursements, and all of those similar to DEQ, a little different. We take 5% for each invoice submitted, and then that whole amount is dispersed at the end there. Right now, again, we are sitting at 8.25%. We generally do 5 to 30 years. We can go out to 60. I've never done a loan for a single year. I think the lowest we've ever done is 2, but it is possible. Securities are flexible as long as we can meet Idaho code in an acceptable way to the board, and we've got some room to wiggle. So things like, again, property, water rights, canal assessments. If you're a irrigation district and you can provide us your taxable authority, something like that is also acceptable. We get to the contract, the security agreement, and the lien documentation. We get that for signature and notary. And then you're ready for disbursement. This is just a draft of our form. We've got them all on our website if you want to look through them. But it's the same deal. 5% holdback on every disbursement, released at the final disbursement. And that's a way for us to get deliverables, things like project reports, final site inspections, make sure you're not going to burn the house down. And then during construction and then during the life of the loan, construction, we require monthly reports to make sure things are on track, or if they're not, that you're aware of it and we're aware of it. And then through the life of the loan, we need an annual financial report, something like a profit and loss sheet to say things are good. Things are good. And it's just a way of giving us a heads up that, hey, if something's kind of getting out of hand, that we can step in and amend the contract in a way that helps everybody out. We can do amendments to the loans if need be. We don't change the scope and we don't change the term. That would require a new loan. But we can do things like, most recently we've amended the amount up for, it's a Blaine County Canal Company. They're converting a lot of their canal to pipeline. And so they're working with NRCS to get some more funds. And we bumped this thing up to, I think it's 6 million now. So they can do the whole project, get funds through NRCS, pay this back. And it really takes the burden off of their shareholders. So there's not such a big annual payment.
It's refinanced.
We do not. So we have in the past, I want to say it was last fall, they opted not to do that anymore. And we also don't do reduced interest rates anymore either.
All right, so time for some questions. Carrie, I think we are gonna unmute you if you wanted to ask your question of Noel again. You are still there. Looks like she left. Okay. All right, any other questions? Yes.
Erin, could you go over the planning grant limits again?
Yes, for the wastewater planning grants, the most, our grant cap is 65,000.
Individual.
Yeah, so, but for example, if the planning effort for your community is 200,000, usually our planning grant would cover 50% would be 100,000, but we've capped it to 65. So your project cost could still be 200,000, but all that we're able to reimburse is up to 65,000. And on the drinking water side, it's 45,000.
With a required match.
So it up to 50%. So again, it's so that's a 90,000 project cost. 45 is the most that we could reimburse. Definitely with that, we've seen higher cost on the planning side, so we had to put a little bit of a cap there so we can give out as many planning grants per year as we can.
So with the engineers agreement to do design, does that agreement have to be the EJCDC long form agreement? Or is it okay if it's a, different agreement form?
Okay, well, for rural development, it needs to be an EJCDC form. That's our standard documents that we have attachments. There is a route you could send us your non-standard form. Then we have to ship those to our OGC for our attorneys to review. I guess if you felt really strongly about it, we could go down that route, but it's going to take several months and maybe even longer to work through those issues because of all the standard federal language we need in there and the way that they want to see it. So that's the easiest route through rural development. I'll let everybody else respond if they want.
I would be unable to respond to that. I don't know, but we can answer that question tomorrow, unless Ryan happens to know.
Yeah, I don't remember.
Okay.
Nicholas is on.
Oh, Nicholas is on.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I can jump in really quick. So for DEQ, we require ISPWC be used for both the engineering contract and the construction contracts, which then in turn references EJCDC. However, we have a little bit more flexibility in allowing the project owners to use their own engineering contracts. And so typically, to be honest with you, we don't see EJCDC engineering contracts as a absolute necessary requirement. And we're pretty flexible with just making sure the basics are covered. But if you're unsure of it, EJCDC is kind of the true and tried method to use. So hopefully that answers your question.
For Commerce, we recommend the EJCDC document, but it's not required. So I just want to thank Shelley for the calendar. Thank you, Shelley. And this is great idea. And then perhaps tomorrow we could get a little quick overview of your center here.
Oh, yeah, I'd be happy
Facility
to.
and the training that takes place.
Absolutely.
The chance.
Yeah.
I'll close out for those online. Thank you guys so much for attending. Tomorrow, same sort of setup. We'll cover engineering and environmental work and finishing out grant and loan and go over some just different project examples of how we've all worked together to fund some different projects across the state. If you have any additional questions or need anything else, you can send me an email. I linked it there in the chat for those of you virtually, as well as the slides. Thank you very much.